Hello, everybody. Hello, security enthusiasts and those who just want to learn more about cybersecurity. Welcome to Leading Cyber Ladies session brought to you by our Canadian chapter for Leading Cyber Ladies and CyberX. Thank you, CyberX, for hosting us today. Neetika and I are your hosts today, and we have interesting session with Kelly Sharadin on open source tools and methodologies for SOC analysts. But before we go into our session, let us introduce ourselves and who we are. My name is Helen Oakley. I am product security architect at SAP and co-founder of Leading Cyber Ladies together with Neetika. Neetika, I would like you to introduce yourself in case somebody doesn't still yet know you.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this August session for the Canadian chapter for Leading Cyber Ladies. My name is Neetika, and I'm the manager in cybersecurity and privacy practice at PwC. So Kelly, if you want to go to the next slide, please. Okay. Hello, everybody. Just wanted to introduce you to our Toronto chapter. So we first started, maybe it's the slide before that, Kelly, I think. Yes, perfect. Thank you. So we launched in fall 2018, and then we had our very first Leading Cyber Ladies meetup in January of 2019, as you can see in this photo on the left. And then before COVID, we had done our meetups every month and also like casual lunches every 2 weeks. It was a great opportunity for us to connect with each other. And now with COVID times, we do that over web, Zoom, and then on CyberX. Thank you for hosting us today. And then we are looking for speakers and then presentations. So if you have very interesting topic to talk about, please feel free to reach out to Helen or myself. We would be happy to have you present on the Leading Cyber Ladies Toronto chapter. And then within Toronto, we have also partnered with other security groups like TASC, OWASP, and then we have done the joint meetups as well. I'll move on to the next slide, and Helen will talk about the history of Leading Cyber Ladies.
Thank you, Neetika. So just in case you're wondering where we're coming from, and like Neetika mentioned, we have chapters all over the globe. So the first ever Leading Cyber Ladies meetup took place in Israel in January 2015. So we've been around for a while. The meetup was originally the idea of Helen Miller. You can see her on a slide among some of the participants there. And she and Karen Lazari together arranged the first ever meetup in Israel with great speakers, and they have been doing it ever since. We have recently also launched the chapters in UK, and Japan is coming up as well, our new chapter in APJ. So we're growing. We are really excited that we can help women in cybersecurity around the world to excel in their career, to raise the awareness in cybersecurity and help them learn more on the topic with networking opportunities that we provide in our group. So Kelly, please go to the next slide. So here are our committee of global Leading Cyber Ladies. You can get in touch with any of us if you have any questions or if you want to join one of the chapters in your region. So feel free to get in touch. We are very open and we are definitely happy to hear from you. Next slide, please. Neetika, it's all yours.
So I wanted to introduce you to our mission. So what we want to inspire women in cybersecurity to lead events through their various experiences and networking opportunities. What we are not is a product pitch. We are not sponsored by a specific company. And then our goal is to increase diversity and representation and equality in cybersecurity field. Good point to note is like we don't exclude anybody, and then we welcome everyone, and then we want to make sure that women have all the opportunities to grow in cybersecurity field, and they also feel welcomed by other ladies in the area. So when we used to do our meetups in the past, we used to have the networking events so people can just talk about their past experiences, what they're working on, etc. Going on to the next slide, please.
Great. So how to get involved with our movement? Very simple. Well, today you're joining our session, so that's the first step. Thank you. You can also engage on social media. You can join our mailing list for the global activities, for the local chapters as well. Learn by attending the sessions and workshops. We have annual CTF as well that we run around February timeline. You can support us by sharing your knowledge, speak at our event, so you can connect with us and propose your topic. We are always happy to hear from you. Like today we have Kelly. I'm looking forward to Kelly's talk. I would love to learn more about SOC because I'm personally not in that cybersecurity area, so I definitely will learn something from there. And of course, if you want to partner, get in touch with us. We are happy to hear from you. But now let's move on to our session. So if you have any questions or comments, please post them in the chat. I will monitor the chat and we will have a Q&A at the end. And for now, if you, Kelly, can move on to the next slide. So I know Kelly from SAP. We worked a little bit together, not on the same project, but we know each other. So, but now Kelly is cybersecurity analyst at Pathfinder. And actually Kelly has a very interesting background, a diverse background. She is coming from criminology, which if you think about it for cybersecurity analysts, it makes sense a lot, right, Kelly? So yes. Why don't you introduce yourself more and maybe take over the session?
Yes, thanks, Helen, and thanks to everyone joining us today. I have to say happy Friday the 13th for all of us joining today. So yes, today is the title for today's talk is a bit of a mouthful. It is open source tools and methodologies for SOC analysts. And for those who don't know what we're talking about when we say SOC, a SOC is a security operations center. And so when Helen approached me asking if I'd be interested to discuss an area of my expertise, I had to sit and think. I go, well, I'm relatively new to the cybersecurity industry, and so what could I confidently talk about? And that's security operations. And so thank you for that introduction, Helen. So I know we just had a slide introducing me to some extent, but I want to get into more about who am I within cybersecurity and what I specialize and how that's going to translate into the rest of the talk. So above all, I'm a part of what's called as Blue Team. So cybersecurity, we have red team and we have blue team and we have purple team. So blue team relates to cyber defense. So that's really where my area of focus is. And throughout my career and my background in criminology and criminal justice, I've been a part of security operations. And so going back in time, so my internship during my undergrad, I worked as a social media investigations and crime analysis intern for an intelligence agency in South Philadelphia. So that's more of your traditional law enforcement type of security operations center where we're integrating with various federal and state agencies, and we're working to disseminate intelligence as quickly as possible to the different agencies so that we can operate and try to reduce crime or solve cases. And so once I completed that internship, I was looking for the next step in my career and where I wanted to go. And during that internship, I got exposed to something that we'll talk about later in this talk, which is open source intelligence. And so through that was sort of my gateway into cybersecurity. And as we go through the talk as well, you will find there are so many avenues to take within cybersecurity. And that was the path that got me interested in incident response and digital forensics. So through that, I joined SAP's Global Security Operations Center, or GSOCs as they call them. And so what I had done for the Delaware Valley Intelligence Center, now I was doing it in a cybercrime space where I was dealing with traditional crime. Now that was changing, but that underlying investigative framework that I was using in the intelligence agency was the same that I was using at SAP, but only in the cybersecurity frame of mind rather. So I worked with SAP for a while, and then I took on my role now as an analyst for a cybersecurity firm called Pathfinder. We're based out of Montana, but we are a distributed company. And so I'm continuing to support their blue team operations. We also do red teaming, but specifically talking about blue teaming, I continue to support incident response investigations and retainers for our clients. And then also one thing that we do is tabletop exercises, which is relevant to this talk as well, because what a tabletop exercise does is it's a way to test security operation teams in a mock incident to see how would you respond in an incident, and verifying that against your incident response plan, seeing if you even have an incident response plan. So that's something else we're going to talk about as well, because as we get into my tools, you'll see I've mapped tools to various phases of the incident response cycle, and I will explain that to you, to those of you who don't know what the incident response life cycle is. So now moving on to the talk. So today's overview, so my target audience might be a little ambitious for our time together, but my goal is to, one, for those who don't know what security operations are in terms of cybersecurity and blue teaming, I'd want to give you sort of a primer into what that is if you're considering a career becoming a SOC analyst or a cybersecurity analyst. And then those of you who are already working as a SOC analyst, hopefully you can pick up a tool that you haven't been introduced to before. I tried to select tools that not only did I use, that I continue to use regularly during my own investigations, but these are kind of tools that aren't quite as obvious, so that maybe what you've seen before. So hopefully you can add those to your investigative tool set. Then next, why open source? First and foremost, I love open source. I love what it's done to technology and what it's brought to, you know, really opening the doors for people who might not have had access to cybersecurity in the past due to cost or barrier of entry. So what open source is, for those who don't know, is it's software that is readily available, free to use, free to manipulate. But the most important thing, and why this is relevant for, especially for security investigations, is that we're able to see what's happening underneath the hood. We're able to inspect the actual source code of the products that we were working with. And so why does that matter? So when you get into incident response and digital forensics, or as we call it, DFIR, you might be involved in cases that require you to go to court, and you might need to justify how you were able to come to a certain conclusion within your investigations. And so being able to confidently and articulately explain the tools that you use and how they were able to produce the results that you have come to in your investigation is really important. Secondly, and the main reason that we're going to be talking about open source today, is that it doesn't matter if you're working for a Fortune 500 SOC like I was at SAP, or whether you're a small shop, or whether you're also working like myself for a cybersecurity consulting firm or as an MSSP. Open source tools are relevant regardless of budget. Sometimes they can be a solution in and of themselves, and other times they can be a building block for a business use case. So if you're trying to approach, you know, who's ever responsible for your budget within your security operations center, and you say, you know what, we had the opportunity to use this particular tool, we've used it to its limitations, and now we need the premium product. Open source can be a really great opportunity to begin to build that use case for that. I do have to put a disclaimer though, open source is not without risk. You know, you have to understand that these are these products are maintained by a dedicated developer community. And so there are opportunities for supply chains attacks like we just saw with SolarWinds. And so you really need to be responsible in how you use these tools and keep them patched and understand and stay relevant as to what's happening in cybersecurity current news, so that you aren't exposing your organization to risk. Then lastly, to wrap that all up, what I really hope is the key takeaway from today's talk is, although we're going to be talking about specific tools, and what I was talking about at the beginning of this talk, where I began in sort of a physical security operations center, and now I'm in cyber, really it's understanding how these tools work, understanding how these methodologies work, and transferring that no matter where you go or in your security career. And that's just something that I think is really important to utilize. So I have to say, for those who don't know, so what does a SOC analyst does during their daily tasks? Like, what does it even mean to be a SOC analyst, and why do these tools matter? So again, kind of relating it back to law enforcement, I think that's the easiest way for people to understand this who might not know. Think of SOC analysts, you are the first responders, you're the first human line of defense within the Security Operations Center. You are responsible for doing the initial triage and analysis of alerts that come in, whether that is through a ticketing system or whether that's through your security information and event management system, or a SIM. And then you escalate, but if you determine it to be what we call a true positive, a true security incident, then you escalate further for investigation. So the way that you can think about this, like I was saying, going back to traditional law enforcement, think of SOC analysts as sort of being the beat cops of your domain, of your network. They're the first ones to arrive on the scene. They're the ones who, write down the information. They'll determine if they need to pull in the forensics teams. They determine if they need to pull in a detective for further investigation. And so it's a really important role for that reason, because those decisions get made at a high pace, and it can be a stressful environment. And so with that being said, SOC analysts, you're really you ingest a ton of information, and being able to sift through that information quickly and effectively is really why having a strong investigative toolkit, whether that is actual tools or just a frame of mind and critical thinking skills, is so important moving forward. So hopefully these tools will kind of help build that for you. So we've talked about, so every security operations center, like I said, it will have people, it has tools, and it has processes. And what I've found is that, generally speaking, people and processes will remain the same no matter where you go across SOCs. And so we have to spend just a moment talking about the processes within a security operations center, and then we can see how the tools get mapped to those particular phases or processes within how every security incident gets managed. So there are different frameworks. For the purposes of this talk, we're just going to focus on the NIST, or the National Institute of Science and Technology Incident Response Lifecycle. NIST breaks it up into 4 phases. There are other shops that will break it up into 6, but again, for the purposes of this talk, we'll focus on the 4. So each incident, event, anything that comes through the SOC that is cybersecurity related as an event will follow this cycle. We start with the preparation phase. This is, how are we even detecting that we have alerts? Have we hired analysts? Have we hired our investigators? Are those individuals trained? Do we have run books? And run books are a set of procedures that we follow every time an incident comes through. And so preparing our SOC to actually be functional and operational. That's done during the preparation phase. Next, we have that where we actually do become operational. And this is really where the bulk of SOC analysts do their work, is during the detection and analysis phase. So just like I said before, how did we, once we have our technology in place to alert us that cybersecurity incidents or events are happening, we then have to act upon those. So that's where just like I said, doing the beat cop analogy, say, a crime happens, the police officer goes to investigate it. That's what the analyst is doing. So they receive an alert, you analyze the alert, you do your initial triage, and you determine, is this really a security concern? And if it is, then you move on to the next phase. And so now we determine that, hey, this individual's computer has become infected with malware, so we got to contain it. So just like we're all experiencing right now, we have to contain the virus of the malware, make sure that doesn't spread to the rest of the environment or to any other devices within the environment. And then that might involve forensics, it might not, depending on what the case involves. But then we remove said virus, record all our findings, and then, for using this analogy, we re-image that device. And so that all kind of happens in a sequential pattern. And then after all that, we do the post-incident activity, or also known as the lessons learned phase, where we take a look at what were the best practices, what did we do well during the investigation, where did we not do so well, and what can we improve on? And then we cycle this back to the preparation phase. So that's where it kind of gets this idea of life cycle, because it is a continuously evolving process that reiterates on itself over and over again. And when you are a SOC analyst, you will do this all day long for over and over and over again. So it is critical, if you are a security operations analyst, that you become intimately familiar with the incident response lifecycle, whether it is NIST or SANS or your own security operations center's processes, but it is a critical thing to understand. So with that, hopefully the reason that you are all here, let's get into these open source tools that I want to discuss. So as I mentioned, these are tools that I use on a daily basis. And although I've chosen to highlight these 5, it is by no means an exhaustive list, and you can go on to use similar products. There's almost a premium product for everything that's matched here right now. But again, we want to talk about the underlying methodologies of these tools. That's really what's important, not so much whether we're using this tool or that tool. So first and foremost, I mean, we could really stop the talk here. CyberChef is such an incredible tool to have as a digital forensics and incident response analyst. Going back to what I just put you through, explaining the incident response lifecycle, I've mapped CyberChef to the analysis phase because when you're doing your investigations with incident response, time is really of the essence. And like I said, you are ingesting so much information that what I think CyberChef really shines at is that it provides what we're looking at right here is a single pane of glass to do a ton of different operations. And so you will be having access to a lot of different tools and you will be jumping around to different screens, but being able to do a bunch of different operations for your investigations within a single tool is a really huge advantage of CyberChef. So CyberChef was developed by an analyst with the government communications headquarters out of the UK. And just like I was saying at the beginning, it is open source, so we can go in and peek at what's happening under the hood. And a lot of love went into the development of this particular tool. So you can have it as both a web application living within the web browser, or what I recommend for best practices, as you can see in the top left hand corner up there, we have the download option. This allows you to download it as a local HTML application, and it's self-contained and it's not calling out anywhere. And so with that being said, I also have to say, as you begin to do your operations, best practices would be to have this also within, if you are working with malicious scripts, set up a tiny little malware analysis environment on a virtual machine disconnected from the network. I just wanted to say that so you're not that guy who releases something malicious into your environment. So how it works is we have our operations on the left-hand side, which get piped into what we call our recipes. And so we can either input raw data into the top window right there where we input, or we can input files themselves. So if you're analyzing email headers, you can analyze the whole email, and you can go then into the output window and see how you're extracting data. So again, one of the great things about open source is really the community that's behind it. So in addition to building your own operations and your own recipes, what you can then go on to do is there are analysts who've gone and created their own recipes for known commodity malware. So if you're working an incident that you suspect is Emotep or TrickBot or Cobalt Strike, which is bound to be hitting your environment at some point, there's pre-canned recipes that allow you to automate, because again, time is of the essence, automate some of your analysis with that. And just a quick tip, I will say the magic operation from CyberChef is excellent if you're kind of stuck when you're trying to deobfuscate a particular script. It's a great way to sort of automate and walk you through the steps of how to pull that script apart and extract what we call indicators of compromise, which is valuable information to then pull back into your detection phase of the incident response lifecycle to help kind of stop further infection if you're being actively targeted. So next is the Atom text editor. So Atom is an awesome open source text editor, and what's different about it from, you might be familiar with Notepad++ or Sublime Text or VS Code. Atom is 100% open source. It's not beaconing out back, it's not sending your data back to Microsoft, and there's no pay barrier that you might get with Sublime Text. As we know, there's a free version and there's a pay version. Atom just is what it is, again, put together by a dedicated open source community. And so the way that I use Atom, so you don't have to be a coder to be an incident response analyst or cybersecurity analyst, but it does help. And if you feel overwhelmed kind of getting started with that, Atom for me was a great way to kind of get comfortable with how these environments work. And so what I ended up using my text editor for was, where it's different than Notepad++, is that we have a highlighting syntax. And so you're going to be working with a security or a SIM rather, your security information and event management system. And a lot of these systems are how they work is that they have their own querying language to help you go through all the logs that you're ingesting. And so when I had certain cases that I would be working on, even though we would have, our standard operating procedures, I would end up using, I had a lot of pre-canned, as we're looking at the screen right now, a lot of pre-canned queries that I would use. And because I was able to highlight the syntax, I was able to know that I was writing them properly, as opposed to just kind of seeing it as basic text, like being able, now there are less obnoxious themes that you can choose from. I just love Vaporwave, so I selected the Vaporwave highlighting syntax, but there's a lot easier on the eyes versions that you can use. And then once you start to get a little bit more comfortable with the text editor and how code can be written, Atom can then be built into a fully functional IDE environment so that you can write your own open source tools or contribute to any of the projects that you see here today. Now, what I was talking about at the beginning, sometimes there are limitations with using open source tools. And that being said, there are certain packages that aren't available in Atom that I might be able to get in VS Code. That's going to be up to you. But again, really, it's the idea here, being able to use a text editor to store, SIM queries that you're going to be using on a regular basis, learning how to write your own detections and being able to have that syntax highlighted so that you know that you're writing your syntaxes, your search queries correctly. And so I encourage that. I've mapped this to the preparation and analysis phase. So Google Dorks, while this isn't necessarily a tool itself, going back to what I was talking about at the beginning about the concept of open source intelligence. So when you're a security information analyst, one of the things that you're going to have to do, like I said, going back to you're really responsible for ingesting a ton of information, but also being able to find the right information when you need it. And so I've wanted to include this into today's talk because Google Dorks is an open source intelligence technique known as like the art of Google Foo, as a way to quickly gather intelligence to support your investigations. So you might be working a case that involves intellectual property or a person of interest. And the way that Google Dorks works is just like we were talking about with our text editor and storing SIM queries. Google Dorks is a way to use special operators to narrow down your results to only the information that you are trying to target. And so in this example that I have shared on the screen right now, say you have an intellectual property case and someone approaches you in your SOC, you get a ticket saying, so-and-so posted proprietary information, and you want to quickly confirm, say I work for IBM, I want to confirm whether that information should have been shared. Is that acceptable to be shared or not? So I might do file type equals PDF, insight IBM, and then this provides me only results related to IBM and PDFs within IBM, as opposed to maybe a random website that has information to IBM and is just inundating me with a ton of PDFs. It's just a way to narrow down your search results to only the relevant information. So this is a really basic example. I've provided a resource link here that has an entire database of Google Dorks that you can use, and you can see how the syntax works and how that might be relevant to your investigation. And so a lot of what incident response is reactive. If you want to start to move into a threat hunting, if you have the opportunity to in your SOC, that allows you to move into threat hunting, what you can do with that is you can start to use Google Dorks to be proactive in securing your security operations center. So maybe you want to do a scraping of check GitHub to see, are we accidentally posting password credentials? And there are Google Dorks that are developed to help you narrow down on leaked passwords and such. And so that's a way that you can start to become proactive. And also, just because it has the name Google Dorks, it works with every search engine. You can use it on Bing, DuckDuckGo, just as a means to increase your investigations and also start to think a little bit more proactively as well. While it may seem obvious, a password manager is super critical, really for everyone at this day and age, but particularly just like I was talking about at the beginning when we were talking about CyberChef, as a security analyst, you are really going to have access to a ton of different tools, and having best practices in how to store your passwords effectively, or even storing your passwords if you do have shared resources, being able to use the encrypted database and sharing that as opposed to sharing passwords in plain text, whether that's through an email. I really cannot highly recommend using Keepass enough. It is open source like all the rest of our tools. It's a great way to help you stay organized because, again, all the tools that I've selected are a big part of also just remaining organized because, again, time is of the essence. You don't want to have to, if you have to go into a certain resource, you want to say, well, where do I have that password, or I forgot it. It's all here in your password manager. If you are new to password managers, I have also included a tutorial on how to walk you through setting that up. And lastly, we cannot have a talk about incident response without including one digital forensics tool for acquisition. So as we all know, once 2020 hit, the world changed a whole bunch and the workforce went remote. And so that meant the way in which we approach digital forensics and forensics in general changed a lot. And so what we used to be able to do is we used to be able to go over to, so-and-so's desk. We would pull what we call, a full disk image, or we call them dead box forensics, and we would have pulled the whole thing. We could do it, no big problem. Once the whole workforce went remote, that changed and forensic acquisition became a lot more challenging. And so having a tool that you can deploy easily to get the information that you need, not necessarily, so we're kind of moving away from full disk forensics. They have a place for sure, but we're more focused on the volatile data and the memory and such. And so a lot more things that malware is targeting. So persistence mechanisms, memory capture, scheduled tasks. And so you might be familiar with volatility. The difference between volatility and D4 triage, developed here by Travis Foley, is it's a little bit more robust in the artifacts that it produces. And so it's a self-contained Python script or executable rather, that you drop onto your target system, your infected machine, run it with administrative rights, and it provides a zipped up pretty package of all that information that is relevant to your cybersecurity investigations. And what makes this tool extremely beastly is that it hashes everything in that. It hashes all the pieces of evidence, which again, going back to what I was talking about, sometimes you might need to do legal proceedings with a case that you're working on. And so having best practices when it comes to preserving your evidence and forensic integrity, having a preset, having that all hashed right away for you is a real benefit to using D4 triage. And so the best thing about it is that the tools that are included within it. So this is a Windows focused machine or acquisition capture. Yes, a lot of us are moving to Mac and a lot of us are moving to Linux. Like I said at the beginning, don't get so focused on the tool, get focused on what we're trying to accomplish here. And so there are definitely Mac components to this, or comparisons to it, or Linux comparisons. But the fact that we're able to inspect how this is working, we're able to know what tools it's integrating with. So with this tool in particular, it's using well-known, trusted Windows diagnostic tools like sysinternals and auto runs to help it extract that information. So again, you can feel confident in explaining, well, how did we get that information and how did we preserve forensic integrity? And so with that, that concludes my discussion on open source tools.
And thank you, Kelly. So that was interesting. I have here one question from the audience, so we'll start with that. So we have a question from Ali. He says, thanks, Kelly. How do you recommend for your students to get started with writing some of their own queries? I guess Ali is referring to Google Dorks.
Oh, to Google Dorks. Well, I think knowing your target helps if you're just writing your own syntaxes. So for instance, I think a good example is GitHub. Or so if you know what's our company name, what's our domain name, and then pairing it with so you would use, Insight GitHub. And then there's arguments that you can pass or parameters to help narrow it down. Are we searching, X, Y, and Z company? And then you might look for, put it in quotation marks. Are we looking for password in text? Are we looking for a particular vulnerable? So this is more of an offensive technique as well. So looking through the Google Dorks database, and that gets updated per year, I want to say. And so it's a collection of offensive techniques that people are looking for. So whether they're looking for vulnerabilities, exposed web pages. So, do you have an Apache server that has, the welcome page still available? And so it's a way to gather intelligence about a target. So this is where I was saying, taking sort of a threat hunting approach to your organization and trying to think a little bit like an adversary and kind of looking at your attack surface and then developing like what would an attacker be looking for within your organization and what might they hope is being exposed. And so trying to craft Google queries around what could be exposed, and hopefully, you don't get anything returned back, but I think that's a really good way to get started. Also, if you start getting into using Google Dorks, one thing you will notice is that, technology is trying, all these services are ramping up to try to prevent abuse from happening. So if you start to launch a ton of Google queries, what you will notice is that Google or whatever search engine you're using is going to start to notice your behavior and go, I don't think it'll start to throttle you. And so again, going back to wonderful community of open source, I've recently came across an automated script, a Python script called PAGODO, so PAGODO, and it's a Python script that runs. It scrapes that database that I was talking about. It scrapes all the recent Google Dorks that have been created that are targeting known vulnerabilities or things that people leave open, and then it loads that database into the script. You point it at a target. It's like I was saying, whatever your company is, we'll call it XYZ company. We point it at the target. We can limit how many results we want. But what the script does is it'll run all those queries for you, but then it also delays the response. And so you're able to kind of evade Google, or, well, in this case, this particular tool uses Google, but whatever search engine that you're using, it's a way to evade being caught and stopped by the search engine when you're doing your initial recon. And so it produces the results. You go investigate those results. And yeah, I think it's a really helpful tool when you need to get particular answers when you're performing your search queries.
So you mentioned that actually search engines can kind of delay or prevent you from continuously using that. And that will happen with any search engine?
Yeah, especially in particular, if you're from, so there's Google, there is Bing, there's DuckDuckGo, Start Page, and then there's the Russian Yandex, which has, and you might use these search engines for different reasons. And so Yandex might produce results that we might not see in Google. And so being able, when I do, going back to Pathfinder, some of the things I do for my own recon engagements is I will use this technique using all those different search engines, because what I receive through Google, Bing might produce a different result. And so going back to your question, Helen, when it comes to Yandex, because Yandex is Russian based, it does not like my US IP address, even if so I have to be careful to use a, switch it up on my VPN, but that'll throttle me real quick. Even if I'm not doing, a sophisticated Google Dork engagement, even if I run one or two queries through Yandex, it'll stop me and it'll ask me for the CAPTCHA. And so that's what I'm really excited about this new tool. I forget who, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on who created this tool, but it is PAGODO. It's available on GitHub. Again, you can look at the source code yourself, but I'm definitely looking forward to using that in my investigations for the reasons that I just shared about being throttled.
PAGO what? I'm sorry.
I'm not quite sure how to say it. So okay. Yeah, it's PAGODO.
DL. Okay, maybe I can, in the meantime, look and post a link in the chat if somebody is interested. But yeah, that's very interesting. What about Tor? Can you do would you be like less likely blocked if you're using Tor, perhaps? Like the proper setup with relays and all.
Yeah, I can't speak to that. I tend to stay away from Tor when I'm doing these types of investigations, because if you've ever used Tor, it's not a fast engagement. And I think, again, going back to what I was saying about, for me, working in incident response, every second counts. And so I think I'm less likely to use Tor for an incident response engagement, but for perhaps a more offensive or proactive engagement, that's something worth exploring.
Okay, awesome. I'll leave it. I'll get to Neetika in a moment. We have a couple questions. I'll read them out. So Ali asking to add a comment. So how would you recommend for students to also get involved in open source communities? What are some steps that you would recommend?
That's a good question. Well, first, I would say research a tool that you're interested in. I think that's always a great place to start. What are you interested in? That'll help carry you through. But I would say not only with open source, but with the greater broadband of cybersecurity, getting involved in your community. So a great place to start is, believe it or not, Twitter is a great way to get involved in the community. But I think starting with, is there a tool that you're particularly interested in? Is there a language that you want to focus on? I know I'm super guilty of that. I have my hand in a bunch of different languages and I never settled on one, but pick a tool, pick a language, and then once you kind of, maybe the language might be a little bit more important than the specific tool, but getting involved in Twitter, and then getting involved with things like, you know, I can only say this from the perspective coming from America, but we have an app called, or a social media website called Meetup, and I've actually utilized Meetup to join cybersecurity communities. There are a ton of, and I've also used it for coding communities as well. So I would say that's a great place to start, just getting to know people, saying, how can I get involved in projects? Meetup was a great way for me to start learning Python. Even before I started going into the cybersecurity realm, having a Meetup where I could learn from people, and then people will always, if you're willing to be a part of it, people will love to have you on a project. And so I think the steps would be this: decide on what language you want to support, look for tools that you're passionate about, and then join a community would be my 3 steps.
Thank you, Kelly. We have another question from K-Star. How do we make sure that the tools that we use are not phishing URLs themselves?
That is the appropriate mindset to have, so I'm happy to hear that. Well, if you want to make sure that the tools that you're using are not phishing URLs, the quickest thing that you can do, so again, when you're working, this is something that you're going to do all the time as a security analyst, have virus total, possibly even URL scan, have a couple of those web browser tools that scan URLs for you. So let's just focus on virus total first of all. So what you can do is, so when you pull up the virus total web page, you can upload files, you can upload links. I suggest just going to the search bar and punching in the URL of your whatever you're looking at, see, has anybody else reported this as being potential malware? And also, you know, this was a big case without getting too far off. It's a matter of just staying, I mean, you really have to stay current in cybersecurity, because I do know that, you know, there was a big event going on for a while where, if you're familiar with Docker containers, where Docker images were being, you know, that's an open source community as well, and people were, you know, uploading malicious base images, and that ended up being crypto mining. And so I would say, to know that, it would take a matter of, you know, your own due diligence. You know, if you don't trust a particular link, pop it into virus total. Has anybody else noticed this as being a potential malicious download? And then secondly, doing your own research. You know, what current malware campaigns are going on? Like I said, is it being are you seeing this trend involved in a crypto mining particular case? And so basically the simplest way to put that is the trust but verify.
Thank you. So maybe stepping back to the career of SOC analyst, you have yourself very interesting path in your career. Maybe for somebody, despite of their background, how would you recommend, like, what would be perhaps some steps to get into SOC analyst career?
I think if you're coming in it from like myself, so I've always worked in technology, but I'm very new to networking. I'm very new to cybersecurity in general. And there is such a need right now, as we all know, that they love to say, you know, the cybersecurity skills gap, or we have a cybersecurity shortage. There is such a need for security operation analysts, as more and more people are realizing we need to develop our cyber defenses. And so the cybersecurity, the SOC analyst role is, there's an abundance of positions available. So that in and of itself is a good place to start. So if you're starting like me, where you don't have that huge networking background or really, you know, cybersecurity background, for me, this is definitely a debatable topic, but school was the helpful step for me because it exposed me to, you know, again, going back to that community, you know, people were able to support me through that journey by connecting with my classmates. And also I made an effort to get really engaged with all the professors that I had. But it's really on, so this is where, you know, I feel very passionate about, while school is helpful in providing you those guardrails, because like I said at the beginning, if you are new to cybersecurity, it can be really overwhelming to know where you fit in and where you would want to go, because there's blue teaming and there's red teaming, and then even within blue and red, there's a ton of different domains that you can focus on from there. And so by being able to have those guardrails of a college program saying, hey, these are the main domains that you should understand, you know, networking, different security fundamentals, but then that degree won't be a coupon for a job. You're really going to have to supplement it with your own interests. And so maybe you go join, you know, you enroll in a school that might be focused towards cybersecurity if you're going towards the SOC analyst role, just to give you those fundamentals of information security, but then you supplement it with additional information. So maybe you start to learn about Python, you start to learn about web app, and you don't have to be experts at these things. You just need to have an understanding of them. And so if you don't want to go the college route, so I fuse college and certs together. And so one thing I will say, again, providing you those guardrails, any of the CompTIA certifications, regardless of whether you go forward and actually test for Network Plus or Security Plus, I mean, you've already done the work, so why not test for it? But just learning the domains of cybersecurity is really helpful. So I would say definitely picking up a Network Plus study book, picking up a Security Plus study book is a great way to kind of get you started and focus your attention on what the background and the foundations are. So that's, I would say, the fastest route, if there is a fast route, would be to kind of have the guardrails of a college program and then supplement it with your own interests, and then joining a community is really the fastest way.
I totally agree. I think community is a big thing. You can learn a lot and you can get a lot of good ideas and recommendations, like from you today, Kelly. Yeah. So I don't have any more questions in the chat. Neetika, do you have anything to add from your side before we close out?
I just wanted to say thank you to Kelly for joining our session today. It was very insightful, and I for sure learned a lot. So thank you, Kelly.
Thank you very much for having me both.
Yeah, thank you very much for you, Kelly, to join us. And thank you for everybody who joined us live today. The session will be available on demand later on. So in case somebody missed, you can always forward the session to your friends and colleagues later on. Thank you again for joining us today at Leading Cyber Ladies session in Canada, Toronto time zone this time. And we, it's Friday, oh my God. Yes. So thank you, CyberX, for hosting us today. Again, happy Friday. Thanks, everybody. And learn every day, every week, something new, and see you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.